All right, we're going to finish up our section in computer gaming, specifically using Python to present text-based games. We're going to first start off with this heads, tails, a very simple heads, tails type game in which we import the random module and we create a function called heads tails. Now notice we create it here in which we define the function called heads tails. Now, there's no parameters, and here's our trusty triple quote right here, and then here below here we call the function. Notice if we didn't have heads tails calling the function here, literally nothing would happen. Now we call the function, we have our triple quotes, we have our, really this does nothing right here. This establishes our bank balance of 100, and then we say while true. So this while loop says that all of this code block right here will continue until we tell it not to, essentially. But when I say the code block, I mean from here till specifically here. Now what I did was I said, if the user's question, shall we play a game, heads for H for heads, T for tails. Now, if the choice is equal to heads, and if the result is in fact heads, we win. So in other words, there's a matching principle. So if our choice matches the result, then we win the game, else we lose. Now, how do we get the result? The result is due to result equals random.choice, and of course, the random module refers to how we imported the module here, and the .choice refers to this list, heads, tails, or there's a null value. I put the null value in there just to add some, well, I give the advantage to the house, which unfortunately is how things go. So if we choose tails or T and the result is tails, we win. However, if the result is not tails, meaning if it's heads or null, we lose. And of course, I mentioned to you the while loop will, shall I say, repeat itself indefinitely in terms of this code block right here. It will repeat itself until we say break. So in other words, if I actually say if the T for tails, E for exit, but really if we choose H, it'll say that we chose tails. If we choose T, it's as if we chose tails, and if we choose, I misspoke. If we choose H, it'll be like we chose heads. If we choose T, it'll be like we chose tails. And then the while loop ends if we choose anything but H or T, and that is what breaks the while loop, and then it'll say thank you for playing. So let's take a look, and let me go back to the game maker right here. Okay, let's go to the game maker, gamemaker.py, and it says, shall we play a game? Choose H for heads, T for tails, E for exit. So let's type in H, and then we win because, oh, you know what? I actually printed out what the computer chose. So anyways, I just did that for troubleshooting purposes. So let's go ahead and let's try this again. Shall we play a game? And let's lose. It'll say you lose. And let's try one more time. Shall we play a game? I'm going to lose here, and T for null, and then let's win one. So what I did was, if you take a look at the code carefully, it actually says print result. That's why you saw the result. And I do that, as I said, for troubleshooting purposes only. And that's a good way to test the logic. But if this was in production, you definitely wouldn't want to print this result. Actually, that's called sonification. Now let's add a monetary element, because the central aspect of even text gaming, for example, even if you look at a Keno game game at a bar or something, that's essentially a text-based game. Even though you might see graphics, it's essentially text. So you get like a string of, let's say, or a collection of 30 numbers, and if you get 15 out of the 30 or whatever, if they match, then you win the big jackpot. So that's essentially what we're doing here, except on a smaller scale. But look what we have here. Bank is 100, and while true, so we're extending the other code where we said while true, but we're saying while true and you remember, that's a logical operator, and bank is greater than 0, then we have the same thing here. But this time I say if you win, you add 40 to your bank. If you lose, then you subtract 40 from your bank. And it's the same thing for tails. So why don't we look at that one very quickly? So let me get out of here and let me type clear, and let's do game maker 2, and shall we play a game? Now we can see that the result is already here. So if I want to win some quick cash, guess what? I win and I have 140 in my bank. Now it says no, there's really no way that I can win, because if I choose anything besides heads or tails, it'll end the game. So I'm just gonna lose on purpose just to check the logic. We can see that I did lose. This time it's tails. I'm gonna select head so I can lose again, and I just want to show you that what happens when I lose. And let me go ahead. It looks like this is off the screen. Okay, there we go. I brought it up from the screen, and good. So I'm gonna lose again. I just want to show you that it will kick me out of the game. See, bank balance is -20. Thank you for playing. Goodbye. So like any good casino game, it kicks you out when you lose, unfortunately. Okay, now we're gonna have some fun. We are going to add a user interface right here with the same concept, heads versus tails. And before I explain the text, if you will, or the code, let me just run it for you here. Python Game Maker 3, and it's just heads, tails. We just have a field right there, and looking at the code right here, so we import the tkinter user UI class or set of or module, which is nothing more than a class or set of classes, and we're importing the whole thing. We're importing also random right here, although we do not use the random quite yet. I just was setting this up for the next game, which will employ random. But here we have the entry from last week's assignment. So I'm not going to explain the code. I'm getting this code directly from last week's presentation, so you can just look at that, look at the specifics. But I just wanted to show you that we have enter H for heads, T for tails. I'll say H, and then it says you chose heads, and if we do T, you chose tails, and if we do heads again, you chose heads. Nothing else happens, but I just want to show you what happens. And to quit, we have to press this X, which ultimately quits the program. All right, let's take a look at the added game functionality. Let's do what we did before. Let's just take a look at the result of the code, and then I can mention a couple things, a couple changes regarding the code. Let's take a look, and we know we can just go to Game Maker 4, and we have enter above for heads or tails. Let's say H for heads, and it says you chose heads, and for T, you chose tails. And the real advantage right here is that we have the new quit button. That is, of course, from last week as well. And what we did here was we have the quit button here, and command equals exit. And again, it's from last week, and we can trace the code to exit right here, which is the function called exit. And it doesn't just exit sys.exit. So of course we have to import sys from up here, but notice what we also imported. We imported the time module. So with the time module, one of the things it allows us to do, it does a couple things. It can tell us the current time, which really does us no good. But if you're writing an application for hotel reservations, for example, that would be a great way to automate a record of when the reservation was made, and you could have it auto cycle to predict how long they're going to stay based on the number of days that they reserved and things like that. However, this time time functionality has a function or method called sleep, and that gives us a 3, or do I have is that a 3 or 2? I can't tell, but it gives us I believe I put in a 2. It gives us a 2-second delay, because you notice here, let me just do it again. You notice that when I press, let me just do H, and it shows heads. I'm typing quit now, and 1, 2, and then it quits. So we can see that basically this matches up to the amount of seconds right here. And that is pretty much the only new thing. All right, let's take a look at the added game functionality. Let's do what we did before. Let's just take a look at the result of the code, and then I can mention a couple things, a couple changes regarding the code. Let's take a look, and we know we can just go to Game Maker 4, and we have enter above for heads or tails. Let's say H for heads, and it says you chose heads, and for T, you chose tails. And the real advantage right here is that we have the new quit button. That is, of course, from last week as well. And what we did here was we have the quit button here, and command equals exit. And again, it's from last week, and we can trace the code to exit right here, which is the function called exit. And it doesn't just exit sys.exit. So of course we have to import sys from up here, but notice what we also imported. We imported the time module. So with the time module, one of the things it allows us to do, it does a couple things. It can tell us the current time, which really does us no good. But if you're writing an application for hotel reservations, for example, that would be a great way to automate a record of when the reservation was made, and you could have it auto cycle to predict how long they're going to stay based on the number of days that they reserved and things like that. However, this time functionality has a function or method called sleep, and that gives us a 3, or do I have is that a 3 or 2? I can't tell, but it gives us I believe I put in a 2. It gives us a 2-second delay, because you notice here, let me just do it again. You notice that when I press, let me just do H, and it shows heads. I'm typing quit now, and 1, 2, and then it quits. So we can see that basically this matches up to the amount of seconds right here. And that is pretty much the only new thing. All right, let's raise things up to like a new level, if you will. And let's take a look at this next iteration, if you will, Game Maker 5. And all right, so it says heads, tails. Now we have radial buttons. So I'm going to show you a couple changes that we did, but these radial buttons are kind of a kind of convenience, if you will. First of all, you should try to have radial buttons and select buttons. I know I didn't go over select buttons, but you can look at it online, like on Google or something, and I can even submit a PDF that will kind of goes over it from an overview perspective, everything that tkinter has to offer, and that also includes drop-down boxes and things like that. And even if you didn't want to look, I mean, w3schools.com, Stack Overflow, just doing a general Google search will show you about drop-down boxes, but we can only spend so many weeks in the tkinter area because next week we're going to talk about more libraries and things. But looking at this, having radial buttons and drop down and select buttons as opposed to raw fields is more of a convenience, because when you have raw fields, it's kind of like, it still feels like a text box, if you will, even though we did our best to just type in H or T or something like that. This is more like it, and we don't need like else as an example. If you take a look, well, let me just show you what I'm referring to. If you take a look at what we have here, or here, we have if choice equals H, it says you chose heads. If choice equals T, you chose tails. Else, goodbye, press the quit button. So there's still like an else situation. With this one, let me go back. Where is it? Did I make a mistake here? Oh, anyway, I must have pressed press the quit button. Anyways, there is no exit. There's no else. So there's only a quit button. So that kind of eliminates the guesswork here. But anyways, we have, we'll just say heads. And it shows here just for, I guess, problem tracking or troubleshooting practices, I just have here user selects heads, and we can say play now. You chose heads, but unfortunately, heads is matches to user choice 1, and the casino chose user choice 2, which is actually tails, and it says we lose. Okay, so we're gonna quit. Now let's try it again, and let's do tails. User chooses tails. And guess what? We win, okay? Because the casino choice was also tails. And we're going to quit. And so let's take a look at the code right here. And this time you can see that the message is you win or you lose, or result is 1, if result is 2. There's no else right here. All right, it's just easier for me to take a look at the actual code. And of course, let me just scroll my screen, and so we can look at the code highlights right here, and we can see, and of course my cursor is not agreeing with me. And let's begin at the beginning. We start off with these functions right here. Well, we actually start off with importing tkinter. We import all of our packages right here, and we begin with these oddly placed functions. Define heads, print user selects heads, and then we have global result equals 1. So I'm using the global keyword here because the fact of the matter is, if I don't put in global result equals 1 is meaningless as we go down further in the code, and we, for example, say that under play, which is the button right here, and of course this is not allowing me to do this. Let me bring up my screen. Hold on. What is going on here? Okay, here we go. All right, okay, this is what I was looking for. Okay, everyone can see the code here. So we can see that the button says play now. That should be familiar, but the command specifically is play, and that refers to this function play. And then it says if result equals 1, then user choice says you chose heads. But result refers to the functions up here. The result refers to the function, to the variable inside of this function heads. And here we have another result inside the function called tails. Now, these functions are actually called by the radio buttons. This is RBTN1, or radio button 1, and then radio button 1 is a variable calls on the keyword radio button, okay, which is a method name inside of tkinter. So radio button is much like, other, I'm going to say, widgets inside of tkinter, because tkinter uses widgets, and the widget itself is asking for various parameters. One of the parameters it searches for is command, and in this case, if you select the radio button heads, okay, it's going to activate or carry out or execute the heads function, and then of course the result will be 1. So, and then tails, if you click on tails, the result will be 2 per the tails function. Now, all that is meaningless unless it actually does something. And under the play method, which is activated by the play now, or excuse me, the button that says play now, and then you press it, and it executes the play method, or it calls the play method. Okay, it prints the user choice. That is for our purposes only. However, if that result equals 1, it'll say you chose heads, and it'll show that as a label. And if we chose 2, it'll say you chose tails as a label. Now, that's not important unless it has implications on what, for example, our opponent, in this case the casino, chooses. So if the casino flips a coin and it says, if it matches our result, then a label will appear and it says you win. If not, the label says you lose. So let's take a look at this game. Okay, let's take a look. Instead of just looking at the code at this latest iteration, let's go ahead and run it. And all right, so heads versus tails on the title screen, heads tails as a label, and we have our two radio buttons. So let's go ahead and select heads. And oh, you know what, we need to remove this too. We don't need to type in H for heads and T for tails. We should probably say something like select the heads or tails. So I'll have to amend that. So I selected heads, play now, and you chose heads, and we can see up here user selects heads, which corresponds to 0. Casino chooses 0, which is probably like a null value, and guess what? We lose. I'm going to go ahead and quit, and let's run this again. And this time I'm going to press tails. As you can see, user chooses tails. Play now. And because when the casino flipped the coin, tails was there. And you know what? This kind of disappeared. Let me bring this back to the forefront. And it says we win. Yay. So that is the game in a nutshell. And that's the extent of our Tkinter lessons, I guess you could say. So in this week's assignment, we'll see if you can, do something a little different with this code. Okay, I did change the incorrect label to select above heads or tails, referring to the radio buttons. So let's run this, and we can see it says that this label says heads tails, and this label says select above heads or tails, and we select heads, and it says, hey, we win. So I'm going to end this week on a winning note for a change. Thank you very much.